back, everybody. So today we're going to go over the brew day for my IPA. Since I'm not good at names, I just named it 31st Pale Ale. Now, I brewed this the day after the coffee IPA. So I needed them both ready for the 4th of July like I did talk about in the coffee IPA. So let's go ahead and get into the grain bill for this. Now, up front, if you've watched any of my other videos, you do know I'm not going to tell you the pounds that I used because everybody's system is different. So the first one, 2-row, I used 94.1%. Then I used carapils at 5.9%. Now that will equal 100, but when I was getting ready to do this, I did find a pound of flaked oats, so I put those in there too. So you guys will have to do the math if you want to add the flaked oats. If I was you, I would just make it 100% with the 2-row and carapils and then put in a pound of oats if you want to. Now, Beersmith calls for the mash-in water to be 4.61 gallons. I bumped it up to 5 gallons. As you guys know, the thermometer on my pot sits just underneath 5 gallons, so I put it up to 5 gallons so it'll read and I don't have to use a digital thermometer or anything like that. So we did get that going. I do underlet, so I dumped all my grains in my mash tun. Then I used my pump to pump the water from the boil kettle into the mash tun. The degrees that we're going to hold this at is 152 for 1 hour, and my mash temp pretty much came in at 151, 152. I think on this one it was a hot day, and I went ahead and I did overshoot my mash-in temperature, so I did have to use ice cubes to drop it down. If you're starting out in brewing, if you don't know that, you can start throwing ice cubes in there if you are over your temperature to bring it down slowly, so that way you don't have to heat up or cool down some water, then undershoot it, then have to boil more water to get it in there. So we did let that sit for an hour, and just like I said on my coffee IPA brew day, it was so hot I did use my drill to crush the grains. And again, with this first floor off, it took me forever to get that grain bed set. I was getting stuff out left and right. Like I say, normally I fill up 2 pitchers and then I can start draining right into the kettle. And again, on this one, I was doing 7, 8, 9, and it was still coming through. So I think when you do use a drill, it could speed it up. So maybe how fast those rollers are going, somehow they expand just a tiny bit and you get a finer crush, and it's just too much for my system. Usually I do hand crank on everything, but like I said, it was so hot in the garage, I wasn't about to crank all that. So my first runnings came out to be 21 bricks. So then Beersmith calls for 4.27 gallons for the mash out. So I heated up 5 gallons. I transferred that to the mash tun, stirred everything up, put the lid on it, and let it sit for 15 minutes just to get incorporated in those grains and pull off the rest of the sugars, or as much sugar as I could. So my second runnings came in at 8 bricks. So I drew off as much as I could. My pre-boil water level was 8.5, and Beersmith calls for 6.73 gallons of pre-boil. So I really need to sit down and work on Beersmith to get those numbers corrected, because again, I know my system, an hour of boiling is going to draw more than a gallon off. So I do need to work on that some. Plus, with the Terminator at the end, some does get left in there in some of the lines. So 8.5 is usually good for me. But the hops. So the hops in this one, so in the boil, so at 60 minutes, we're going to use half an ounce of Magnum. The Magnum that I used, the alpha was 11.5 and the beta was 5.5 to 8. Now, I'm going to have to look at some other packages. I do take pictures of every single hop pack that I get. I don't know if I've ever saw a range that big. You know, usually there's an alpha number and then a beta number, but on this package, it's 5.5 to 8. I never saw one that's that far out. So, let me find it. At 10 minutes left in the boil, it's 1 ounce of Simcoe. Now that Simcoe is a 13.6 alpha and a 4.2 beta. Then at 5 minutes, 1 ounce of Amarillo. The Amarillo is a 8.6 alpha and a 6.5 beta. Then at 5 minutes also, you're going to add 1 ounce of Citra hops. And the Citra is 13 alpha and 3.8 beta. Then the last one at 5 minutes also is Mosaic. The Mosaic is 13.6 alpha and 3.6 beta. So after that's over, Beersmith called for my gravity to be a 1061, and looking at my notes, my gravity was 1058. So a couple points off, but no big deal. Again, like I said, I just wanted this ready so we had something to drink at the party. Now, I want to go back a little bit on this one. As you guys saw in one of the videos that I did before, what I did on this one was I drew off some of the pre-boil, and I actually made my starter from that. And I'll put a link to the video that I did, but really drew off almost a liter, put it on the stove. I added some water. I think my pre-boil was 12 bricks, so I figured out about what a 1030 beer would be by adding water. I boiled it for 15 minutes, and that's what I used for my yeast. So the yeast in this one is White Labs WLP 001, which is the California Ale. So after this, I did end up with a post-water level of a little bit over 6, which is perfect. We're gonna add dry hops, so we do want the level to be up a little. So I did have to let the starter go for 24 hours, so I did not pitch until the next day. And I don't think it's a big deal. You know, it was sitting down here in the basement. It had an airlock on it. Nothing was getting in there. I think it's fine to let it sit an additional day before you start adding the yeast to it. So if we look at it, I did pitch the yeast the next day, which would have been a Monday. Within 4 hours, this thing was going. And usually if I use my fast pitch, it's almost 24 hours before it's going. So once I'm out of my fast pitch, I'm probably going to start doing this method of where I take my actual pre-boil wort, and that's what I use to make my starters. So on this one, there is a dry hop. So after fermentation has almost ended, not at the very end, but almost when it's done, we're going to add 1 ounce of Amarillo, and I'll put the numbers, the alpha and the beta, up so you guys can see them, but I'm not going to read them over again. So 1 ounce of Amarillo, 1 ounce of Citra, 1 ounce of Mosaic, and 1 ounce of Simcoe. And that was I did a dry hop of that for 3 days, and then I transferred it right to a keg. Now, obviously, since this one was just like the IPA, it is done. It's been sitting. We will have a day one review just like we had with the coffee IPA, and then we'll have a 4-week review of it. Just so we can kind of keep in the same thing, and we can, I would almost say, learn what a young beer is like versus an old beer. Most of the time in IPAs, you do want to drink them young, but we'll see how that goes with being less than 24 hours in a keg and tasting it. The one thing I would recommend, since I've already made this beer, is make sure you're putting your hops in a muslin bag or something. When you start getting into 4-5 ounces of dry hops and just putting them in there, if you use a racking cane like I do, you're going to get a lot of those leaves that go into the beer. So just make sure, save yourself a headache. If you have a big mouth bubbler or a large open container, a bucket, something like that, make sure you use a bag. It'll save you in the long run. So I'll go ahead and tell you, just so you guys know, the final gravity, it went down to a 5.75 bricks, and the final ABV on this one is a 6.67%. So we'll go ahead and cut it off there. Fermentation went just fine, obviously. The one thing I have to say is I do not like that Beersmith does not give you the ABV on the actual sheet, the brew steps. That's I can never find it. Obviously, it does have a final gravity in here of 1031, but because I go by bricks, I would have to do some calculations to see how close that was, but we'll have that in the next video. So that'll wrap up this brew day. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Also, leave a comment down below and let me know your guys' best IPA recipe, and maybe I'll pick one of them and I'll brew it. So until next time, happy brewing. Thank you for watching this video. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Leave me a comment down below to tell me what you thought about this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe and share, and hit that bell so you know when new videos are coming out. You can check out these videos over here. Also, head over to 31stbrewing.com for everything beer and home brewing related.